My name is Mikey. I'm with Listen Technologies. There's not that many assistive listening companies out there, but we are one of them. We are my favorite. So this is Joe from Excellence Marketing. They are our reps locally here. So if you have any follow-up questions, either one of us can help you. What you have in front of you is a little ADA cheat sheet and some M&Ms. If you've ever installed Listen products, you should know every single box we ever send has a full-size pack of M&Ms. If you don't get those, that means somebody got to the box before you. It used to be peanut M&Ms until we sent peanut M&Ms to a school, and they were like, "Are you trying to kill allergic children?"
Oh, yeah.
So, yes.
So is Listen owned by the Mark company?
To the where? No.
Or whoever M&M's is?
Yes.
Yeah,
We're just a tiny little fish in their big pool. No. But M&Ms, I think that peanut M&Ms were the founder's favorite, and it's just been something we've done.
But they are superior.
I mean, really, they are the best. They can put all kinds of pretzels and coffee flavored, but M&Ms is the
Yes,
best.
my wife is peanut butter and
Those are good too. Those are my flight guilty, my airport guilty pleasure. Peanut butter.
And peanut butter, then the reasons why.
So you've got my business card if you have follow-up questions. But yes, and you have hearing protection there because we don't want you to need us. Everyone in this room is going to need us someday, but we really hope that you don't. Is anybody here trying to get CTS renewal credits? Oh, okay. Then we don't need to pass this around unless you want to give me your digits. But this is a CTS renewal approved course, and thus when I give it for that, it's brand agnostic. First of all, and I just say brand specific questions for the end if you have them. And it includes California Building Code because it's a little bit more stringent than ADA, it's part of the course. But if we're not going for those credits, we can go more freeform and talk about whatever we want to talk about, if you'd like. You tell me, I'm not here to drive a hard sales discussion with you, so it's not my plan. But when we get into the four technologies, you might have specific questions and happy to answer them. I'm a consultant liaison at Listen, so I'm not salesy by nature, but feel free, I have held a lot of responsibilities at different times over the years, so if you have a question, I can probably answer for you. So having said that, this is me. That is my QR code to LinkedIn if you want to find me. It's also on my card. If you have any other questions, that's a quick way to find me. But a little bit about me. I've been with Listen for 8 years. Prior to that, I worked directly with the low-income deaf and hard of hearing community where I live, ensuring equal access to telecommunication. So still tech-related, but I come from outside of our typical AV channel. Having said that, after most of my adult life working with the deaf and hard of hearing, it hit home. My husband lost his hearing pretty severely after I came to work for Listen. So I knew what I was looking for. I recognized it pretty early. He has about a 70 dB loss, so that's pretty catastrophic. He has what's called a cookie bite hearing loss. So the average hearing loss that's coming for all of us as we age, right? Your audiogram kind of looks like this or like this. You can hear highs but not lows. My husband's look like, it's called a cookie bite because it looks like someone took a bite right out of his audiogram. Oh. So right in our speech range, specifically females. So he didn't know. He could hear the garbage truck, he could hear the music, he could hear birds chirping. He couldn't hear us. The kids would say, "All right, Dad, I love you, good night." And he'd say, "Fine, go to bed." And we were like, "What is up with Dad?" Right? And everywhere I went, people would be like, "Is your husband grumpy?" I'm like, "What? What did you do?" And they're like, "Well, his face is just really grumpy and he didn't say hi." I'm like, "Oh, he didn't hear you and he's trying to understand what you're trying to say, so he's staring at your lips, right?" And so we all knew before he knew, but 70 dB is pretty difficult to navigate. So we do rely on our products, and it's just one of those stories that I tell only because life puts us where we need to be. It gives us the experiences we need to change lives around us if we're listening and paying attention. And so, my hope is that what you learn here today will help you listen and pay attention in environments that might be difficult for people with hearing aids or hearing loss to hear. The rule of thumb is if you have trouble hearing, they have a lot of trouble hearing in that space. So, did anybody new come? Is anybody that's in the room wanting CTS renewal credits? Okay, then we won't, and no one here is going to be bothered by California Building Code, right? We don't have any far-flung travelers here today. So we're gonna cruise right past that. And feel free to ask brand-specific questions if we're not going for that brand agnostic stuff. Feel free to interrupt and ask. And we're a small enough group that feel free to interrupt and ask anyway. Okay, moving forward. So having said all that, what we're going to talk about today is the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it pertains to assistive listening specifically. They have a lot to say about, like you said, the height of some of these elements and things like that. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm not an expert in that. But how do we understand these laws and what can we do? What's good, better, best on how we can start to try to meet them? How can we comply and how are they enforced? But first we should talk about why it's even important. Does anyone in here wear hearing aids or have hearing loss or love someone who does? Okay, so you probably, this is gonna be, you can probably get this course. So hearing loss is the third most common chronic physical condition. According to the World Health Organization, 430 million people worldwide have disabling hearing loss, and they consider disabling hearing loss anything greater than 35 dB in your stronger ear, right? So that's what it goes into debilitating. I would say in this room we probably have some good 10%ers. It's just kind of the nature of our business, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But again, that makes it the third most chronic physical condition in the United States, behind arthritis and heart disease, and it is twice as prevalent as diabetes or cancer. That's why we call it the invisible disability, because it's not something, it's something that's so common. It's among us all the time. We don't see it. It's not like a wheelchair. It's not like wearing glasses. It's usually something that we don't talk about and we don't notice that someone might be struggling. So that puts it at 1.5 billion people worldwide with some measurable hearing loss. That's almost 1 in 5. So, you know, think about that for just a moment. 1 in 5, that's how many people in this room. How many people do we know and love that suffers in this way? And I would venture to guess in our industry, it's higher, right? We are exposed to loud noise pretty consistently. There are musicians and people who love music among our ranks, right? And so I would say that number is probably higher. And it affects the work we do every day. Musicians are 400% more likely to have hearing loss and 57% more likely to have tinnitus, which can be just as debilitating, if not more so, than hearing loss at times. So, if this is you, and just please protect your hearing. We do not want you to need us. And what I will say that is not part of this presentation, but is part of my soapbox speech, is if you think you have some hearing loss, it is important for you to connect with an audiologist as early as you can. Whether you're going to treat it or not, even a 10% loss can make a struggle at work and in life, but they should start getting a baseline. You know, go over 3 years, check on it, see if it's getting worse, and decide what you want to do with it. And as early as you think you are ready for some support from a hearing aid, I would go for it. It's not great. It's not like popping on glasses, and it's not a huge relief sometimes. It's something our brains have to learn to adjust to. But when we are 80, we all lose some of the strength of our senses, right? All of our senses, our vision, our hearing, all of it, our balance. Hearing aids are built to correct only what hearing we have left, right? They just amplify the hearing we have left and the range that we have left. So if we have not been stimulating that hearing nerve, it's just like a muscle. You use it or you lose it. So there are parts of your brain that don't get stimulated if you are not fully stimulating your hearing nerve. And so when all of a sudden it's a 30% hearing loss and we do want to correct it, we may not get as good of results because we've lived for 40 years with a little bit of hearing loss, right? Off my soapbox. So when these numbers are climbing, in fact, 14.9, almost 15% of kids between the ages of 6 and 19 in the U.S. have hearing loss, measurable hearing loss. I think, you know, obviously some of this is hereditary, but these numbers are higher than we're used to seeing because, think about it, we are an entire, not my generation, but my kids' generation were raised with earbuds. They have been piping loud noise into their ears, directly into their eardrums for their entirety of their lives. So if you like to wear earbuds, or you love someone who does, please just check the volumes, keep them reasonable. Even if it is not warning level, having it consistently stimulating that eardrum I have a son who has auditory processing disorder, so he sometimes jumbles what he hears with what his brain is telling him. But one thing that makes it worse is when he is exposed to his loud music for a long time, he's very sensitive to noises. He doesn't have hearing loss, but he will jump at his skin at loud noises because he's overstimulated it. So, something to consider. And, you know, we joke about hearing loss. If I had $1 every time someone said, what, you work at Listen, what? I would be rich. It is a joke if, you know, we try to be good-natured about it, but there are a lot of debilitating side effects that we may not see on the outside. People with hearing loss report all of these feelings, and they are real and valid feelings that cause them to withdraw from a learning situation, from a social situation. They feel isolated. They don't want to have to say what all the time. They either feel like a burden, or they start to get really frustrated with the people around them for not understanding that they need to be accommodated. Either way, it makes them pull back from relationships and stop doing what they want or what they enjoy. But more importantly, that they are directly linking through studies untreated hearing loss to dementia. They are seeing increased levels of dementia because, again, it's portions of our brain that we are not stimulating when we are not putting ourselves in some of those environments, social environments, but also just the physical act of stimulating those nerves when you hear affects our brain long term. Hearing loss, I guess, this is a new fact, hearing loss is estimated to account for 8% of dementia cases. There's a citation there, I have to read it and check that out because that's new. Okay, but, you know, don't we have hearing aids? Isn't that the solution? Why do we need assistive listening if hearing aids even exist, right? This is probably the comments that you probably are getting pushback on. We don't know anybody with hearing loss. Nobody has asked for accommodations. What about something personal like hearing aids? For some situations, many situations, yes, they are the answer. But their effective range is 3 to 6 feet. They are for one-on-one conversations. And even then, if you are in a restaurant or somewhere loud, you basically have a few choices. Hopefully you have a good equalizer or something on an app on your phone and you can put it into restaurant mode if you can afford those hearing aids. But for most people, they just turn them off. They would rather not communicate than have that background noise constantly being amplified. A hearing aid is just a microphone. They're getting better, they're pretty directional, but it is just a microphone amplifying noise into your ear. So, little story, when my son graduated, he picked Buffalo Wild Wings for his party. And I'm looking at my husband, we're all talking, we're all interacting, and he's like, and I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm listening to a podcast. At your son's graduation party? And for him, it was a bigger relief because he had to block out all that noise around him. It was too much to use his hearing aids. He couldn't hear, it was awful without his hearing aids, so instead he just covered it with some other noise. So it is a difficult scenario even with hearing aids. And you guys, this is pretty elementary for you, but it is part of the presentation. Again, hearing aids, one-on-one conversation. It's no different than me speaking into a mic to an audience. It feels pretty personal. But when you get into the larger spaces, even spaces like this, you start getting really competing information coming at you, depending on where the PA is and depending on the surfaces of the room. It's causing a few things to take place. We hear the voice, we hear the PA, we hear the early reflections of that amplified audio coming at us. We don't. Our brain is filtering that at all times. We're working on it. But if you have an amplifier in your ear, it's amplifying that as well. And then when you get to the reverb, in the large spaces, it's really coming at you. So that's really distracting and very, very tiring. Our brains, for all of us, even with average hearing, are constantly looking for the cues to piece together information. We're using our eyes, we're using our ears. If I covered my mouth right now, it's probably harder to follow along because you're using visual cues when I speak, right? It's why masks were so difficult for a while. And then you add in the rustling, the coughing, the chatter, the baby crying, the HVAC. All of that is also being amplified in many hearing aids that don't have the ability to filter that out. So again, the rule, if it's difficult for you to hear, it's really difficult for someone with a hearing aid to hear, and super difficult if you're not wearing a hearing aid and you have hearing loss, which is also common. Hearing loss is a spectrum, right? It's not, a hearing aid is not going to help everyone, just like captions are not going to be preferred by everyone, and even my assistive listening not preferred by everyone. There is no one perfect fix for hearing loss. So what exactly is assistive listening? Basically, the ADA defines it as an amplification system utilizing transmitters, receivers, and coupling devices to bypass the acoustical space between a sound source and a listener. What does that mean? It's basically a system or technology designed to improve a listening experience by transmitting audio directly to the listener's ear without amplifying any of the ambient noise. That's all it really is. It's why in some environments I choose to use it. When we go to see Hamilton, my husband checks out a unit, I'm like, give me some of that, right? Because it's an easier way for me to follow along with a very fast-paced musical, right? And they all work exactly the same way. There's many ways to skin this proverbial cat, that you have an audio source, so you always need a nice, clear audio source, which is getting harder and harder, right, in our hybrid lives. We've got a sound bar maybe, but how we have to account for, are we capturing the near and far audio for the person who needs to use that assistive listening? There should always be an audio out. Whether you can put an assistive listening system in there or not, make sure there's access to the amplified audio in the room and the far audio if you've got someone coming in remotely. That audio source is going to be run to a transmitter of some kind of technology, and there's got to be a way to receive it. We'll talk about why that is so important in just a minute. Because we live in a noisy world, right? And every one of us deserves an exceptional listening experience and exceptional education, right? It's what they have equal access to education. It's part, if ADA doesn't get you, there are so many other educational laws that will protect that student, right? Those are the personal accommodations they might need. Remember, ADA is written very broadly. It is to help the broadest amount of people in the broadest amount of situations. There is no perfect fit for anyone. So there may be situations where it's not, what I'm telling you is not appropriate for that. But they try to make a broad law. And you will see in some cases it's very broad. Okay, so under the, like I said, we have California Building Code. I'm going to just glance over it. Anything in orange is California. But it is required by law. You know, it is the right thing to do. We all understand why we need it. But this is about how to build that compliant system. And again, a little light housekeeping. I am not a lawyer. This information is just general guidance. It should not be considered substitute for legal advice or legal opinions. You need to refer back to the authority having jurisdiction at your campus and get their advice as well. And if they don't understand it, they can call. I will advise them, and then your legal counsel can advise you. Okay, so a couple things. The ADA Act was only enacted in 1990, which is a little bit shameful. I mean, I can't believe it took us that long to get there. But maybe perhaps more odd is that it's only been updated one time since then, and that was in 2010. At that time, it was edited to more closely match the 2003 International Building Code standards, and that did a few things. It used to be that rooms under 50 were exempt. That is no longer the case as of 2010, and then they took effect on March 15th in 2012, so quite a while ago, but most campuses haven't really caught up with that. Funny story, I was giving the same course to a very large campus that I will not name, and they are great friends of mine, but when we talked about that part, their faces went just, I watched them fall, and they were like, anything under 50 is exempt? I said, no, not anymore. So that expands the places that require it, right? And they said, well, first of all, we thought it was 40, and so all of our classrooms are 39 people. I'm like, all these years you could have had 11 more people, butts in the seats, but you're wrong on so many levels. Like it was so wrong in so many ways, but they were trying. They were doing their best effort to try to do the best with the resources they have, but they got it wrong a couple different ways. So again, you will see as we move on that some of these recommendations are a little bit archaic because the world has changed since 2010. They left us some outs and some vagaries because they knew they couldn't really think through all of the technologies and all of the types of environments we'd be working in. Certainly they couldn't conceive of some of the things you have even in this building. So they left it a little vague, but again, they're not asking me my opinion, but it is ready to update it. So where is it required? This is what they say. In each assembly area where audible communication is integral to the use of the space, assistive listening systems should be provided. What does that mean in English? It means that if you're using amplified audio to utilize a space, and that amplified audio is conveying something pertinent to why that guest is there, why the student came to school that day, it needs to be run through. There needs to be the option of assistive listening. What that does not include is background music and systems that are only used for paging. PA systems that are for like announcements, yes. So if I'm sitting at a swim meet, yes, I should be hearing those announcements with assistive listening. But that does include things like projectors in classrooms, right? Even if we don't have a speaker system, if we are amplifying audio through a laptop, through a projector, that makes it difficult for a student to follow along. So those things all count. Don't panic. We'll talk about ways to work on that, but there is only one exception to that rule, and that is in courtrooms, which is not relevant to you, but it doesn't matter if that courtroom has a dirt floor and has never had any amplification. It's just equal access to the justice system, right? That's something we have to provide. So they said assembly area. They go on to loosely define it. That's why it says including, but not limited to, these spaces: classrooms, lecture halls, courtrooms, meeting spaces. Generally, it's understood as public spaces and schools, right? California takes this and pluses it, and all of our meeting rooms and corporate spaces also have it, but in general, so your performing arts, your amphitheaters, these are all spaces that are likely on your campus. But again, including but not limited to, because we are, the world's constantly inventing new diversions and new places to go. Skip California. Okay, so what is required? There is assistive listening that is functional, right? We go to houses of worship on Sundays and they usually have maybe a Spanish and English service so you can follow along and use an RF system, for example. That is an example of a system that is super helpful, but they don't need to meet ADA compliance most of the time in most cases. So they might not be checking every legal box, but they have something in place. That's a great place to start if you can't afford to check every legal box. Something is better than nothing, always. But to create an actually compliant system, you have a transmitter, you have receivers, and that receiver count is mandated by the ADA. We'll talk about it based on the occupancy of your spaces. 25% of those receivers have to be T-coil hearing aid and cochlear implant compatible. For those of us who are, from this area, induction rooms are very popular here because you have some really great advocates in the area. Some states I've never heard of them. But what a neck loop does is create a personal induction loop, so you are not installing it in the room. You would need a receiver, and if your choice is, if I have a cochlear implant or T-coil, or hearing aid that has a T-coil, I would turn it on, I would take the receiver, I would wear the neck loop, and now I don't have to sit within a loop. It's just a personal neck loop. So 25% of those receivers must have a neck loop with them. And then signage. That is the international symbol for assistive listening. Sometimes it has a little T on it if you have a loop installed in the room. It's pretty much standard, and that needs to be posted at the entry to each space that must meet compliance. The only exception to that would be if you have a ticket counter, right? If you have a ticket counter, you can just put one on each end, and it's generally assumed when I step into that theater or that arena, assistive listening is going to be available in the spaces. But technically, the law reads that our classrooms should have it. Is there an ADA policeman going to come hunt you down and check your doorways? No. Maybe it's going to be at the front of the building, and you tell someone this is where you're going to go to check out assistive listening. That could work too. But there are some areas that are a little more strict on that. So they give us a table to follow. I won't read all of this to you in the interest of time, but basically how many receivers are required, that's going to be based on the capacity of the space, and they're going to give us a chart. When they updated ADA in 2010, they expanded the places, so rooms under 50 are no longer exempt. It used to be fixed seating only, that's no longer the case. But in doing that, they also backed off on some of the receiver requirement in high capacity places. It used to be 4%, which is huge. California still is, and it is absolutely ridiculous when you get into stadiums and arenas. Thousands of receivers sit unused. So what they did is they played with that a little bit. So I'll show you the chart. And then there's the verbiage around the hearing aid compatibility. What they mean there is neck loops. So here's the chart. So you can see 50 seats or less, you are always going to need 2 receivers and 2 neck loops. That's going to be your minimum in any space. And then as you get to the higher counts, you're going to start to back off. So at 2,000 seats and over, 55 units plus just 1 for every 100 seats. And then you take that number and you just do 25% of it. That's how many neck loops you need to have. You do not need to commit this to memory. We have calculators, we have apps. You've got Joe and I mean, we can figure that out for you pretty quickly. Mostly of California. Here is a caveat that will be very helpful to you. So, when a building contains more than one assembly area, and those assembly areas are required to provide assisted listening, if they are under the same management, in the same building, and using the same technology, you can just take a sum total of that capacity of the spaces, plug it into the calculator, it will spit you back out a smaller number. And then you'll have a discussion. Where are we going to store these? Where are we going to charge them? Who's going to be responsible to talk to the students about where to get it? Is it the Office of Accessibility? Do we keep a few here at the information desk and they just check them out when they enter the building? Do we put 2 in every room? It's a discussion you can have and do what makes the most sense. This verbiage says in the same building under the same management, but I know that campuses across America take their total capacity and they just make sure they can account for that and they store it somewhere central on campus. And depending on what technology you use, we'll talk about that. It might make sense to just give the student a receiver for the semester, right? We'll talk about that. But again, this is the calculator. I just took a screenshot from our website. USA, we have calculators for California and international and ADA. If you need that, it's on our website. So I left this verbiage in here because California specifically talks about where permanent and portable systems make the most sense. The ADA removed that verbiage, but it's still pretty much generally accepted that in spaces where it doesn't make sense to have a permanent system, a portable system will work and can be shared among the spaces as long as your receiver requirements are met. But it's vague, and they, back in the day, there would be, an aux out, and you could just walk in with your system and plug it into the wall. And that was, you just had to make sure that you were accounting for power and audio. That still flies all the time. We have portable kits that really kind of help you out in a bind if it doesn't make sense to install in every room. That's something we can talk about the nuance of some spaces. That's not going to fly, right?
That's actually how we handle it in all of our under 50 classrooms without any PA. We have disability services has the little kits, and they just give them to the person who needs them. And anything larger than 50 that we have a PA microphone in, then we have an assistive listening system.
And the thing I like about those portable kits is there's going to be spaces where you don't have any amplified audio. It's still hard for certain people to hear, right? So we have kits that even have like a tabletop mic. So if you can't access the inner audio, and it's literally just a line out, you could set that up if they needed it. Or maybe they have a personal accommodation with a personal amplifier they carry around. That's not ADA. That's, educational protections. But all of those things work. So that's something we can kind of talk about the nuance of, but it's not something we suggest for rooms over 50. It wouldn't even save you money at that point, honestly. This, we already talked about this, that's the symbol. Okay, so amplified audio integral to the use of the space. You guys don't really need these reminders. That includes computer and projector. No longer matters if it's fixed seating or not. We'll skip ahead here in the interest of time. So, how are these things enforced? Don't be afraid of this. I have recently just helped a campus through a mass violation of ADA law, so I kind of got to see a front row seat to how it works. But it is enforced by the Department of Justice, and the way that works is I'm a student, I'm a parent, I'm someone who came to your campus, and I asked to be accommodated, and you weren't able to do that. That does, if they choose to report it, if they know their rights and they choose to report it, it goes to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is not going to waltz in and give you $75,000. That's the max fine for a violation. $150,000 is double that. It's not 75 plus 75. They double it if you are not going to bring yourself into compliance. In the case of the campus I'm referring to, they taught classes for the Department of Justice, so they got audited by the Department of Justice. So it was everything. It was their walkways, it was their door widths, it was their bathrooms, their curbs. Our portion was pretty huge, obviously, to outfit an entire campus correctly. But the Department of Justice worked with them for 6 years on a plan to get there. They would rather do that than levy fines, and really, I truly believe these are kind of their limits on to how much you can be litigated for, to be honest, right? But it is a real thing, there is a real form, it does happen all of the time, but if you are doing the best you can in that situation and can show that you're working towards it, that's gonna be very, very good. Here's our 5-year plan. But also, the chances of hordes of people coming at the same time to vigilante request receivers is pretty small. So again, this goes back to, should you be in compliance? Yes. Is something going to be better than nothing? If you have 100 receivers, but you should have 200, you're going to be protecting yourself, right? The thing to look out for is, do the systems work? Are they charged when people need them? Are they functional and connected to something? Those are the things you need to be really making sure you're on board with. Okay, any questions on the law? Okay, so
They don't work when the instructor says, I don't need the money.
Yeah, that's right. I don't need a microphone.
And then they just start talking. It's like, no, there's somebody who needs it.
Yeah.
Yeah, wear the mic, I don't know. Yeah.
So these are the 4 common accepted assistive listening technologies. Some of them are specifically called out in ADA, radio frequency, infrared, induction loop, specifically mentioned. Audio over Wi-Fi is coming up real quick, as well as, we can talk a little bit if we have time, some new and emerging technologies. But again, they knew that they really could not conceive of technologies going forward. So they did leave us an out. I'll show you the verbiage on how we can get some new technologies in there. But basically, super simple, RF, we know it, we love it, it's gonna work forever. It's in stadiums, gymnasiums, things like that. You got your audio sources run to a transmitter and an antenna. That antenna choice is gonna be based on how far you're throwing that signal and where you might need to remote that antenna to. And then any receiver within range of the RF frequency can pick it up, meaning it is not secure. It also means you're kind of limited on how many RF systems you can run in the same space at the same time.
Yep.
Plenty of campuses use it in every classroom, and because they assume, well, they'll just never get turned on, right? So it doesn't matter. And I think that they believe it's saving money. And in some cases, I guess if you're buying something, cheap on Amazon, it is. What I will tell you about that, though, to be aware of, is those systems aren't ADA compliant because they usually don't have the right audio quality. There are some certain rules on manufacturers we have to worry about that you don't on our receivers. Things like, does it have a jack for a neck loop, right? Things like that. So it's not really saving any money. But, there are there campuses that standard is to have RF in every classroom? Yes, they just only turn them on as they need it, right? There's easier ways probably to go about it, so you don't have to separate frequencies. And the student would have to know the channel in the room. So it's always not the easiest for everyone, I would say. But it does lend itself really well when you're just trying to throw out a signal to everyone within range. Things like theaters and classrooms. I don't know why boardrooms are on there, because boardrooms usually want to be secure, and that is definitely the wrong icon. So disregard that.
The Amazon boardroom.
Yeah. Woo. Okay, infrared. This one is very popular on campuses, and we should spend some time on it. Infrared historically has had a bad rap, because it's light dependent. We are sending that signal over light wavelengths, right? They're longer than the human eye can see, and they wirelessly and securely transmit audio, right? So you see it in boardrooms, you see it in courtrooms, but you see it in classrooms because the benefit of that audio being secured to the room means I can install and leave on an IR system in every room, and I can give the student a receiver for the semester, and all they have to do is walk into that space and it's going to join the right channel. They'll never have to change the channel. Unless you're offering in 3 different languages, then they might have to go find their language. But in general, IR is going to pick up the strongest signal in the room. And it's a great and easy way to do divisible spaces. Specifically with ours, I can't speak to other technologies because we have a very, very proprietary way we receive infrared light. Listen receivers, they're not, normally infrared is just like a TV remote, right? You're just trying to line up the signal and you hope the infrared receiving eye is picking up what you're putting down, right? Our units are entirely 100% made out of infrared permeable plastic. So even belt clip will receive that signal through it. That's how I get to listen to Hamilton, we just have 2 ear jacks on my husband's unit, so it doesn't really matter if it's in his pocket or whatever, it's still gonna pick up that light, and I get to listen along too. We do parlor tricks, I put it in my pocket, I put it on the table, because most people who've used IR don't really believe those specs, but it does, great, the thing to know about IR, because the IR market's changing a lot, is it's not proprietary. Our plastic is, right? But I can put those receivers on our competitor systems. They can put theirs on ours if they work in, there's 4 IR frequencies, so you can have up to 4 IR channels in the same space. Our stuff picks up all 4, our transmitters do the same, so you just want to check that and make sure you're on the right band. But it will improve the range of an old system, because the thing about infrared is it's going to fade, right? Those light diodes are going to eventually weaken. So you can instantly get more range by putting on new fresh receivers. But honestly, if the system's that old, you might want to just replace it. But again, very, very easy for campuses and lends itself well to that portable scenario. Seems odd, but I could throw up our IR on a little tripod and hand out a receiver, and you'd be able to pick, as long as I have an audio, even a mic, or it comes with a tabletop mic, you can display that. It comes in a case, you can power the case, plug it in a closet, it's just ready to go when you need it. So infrared doesn't seem like it would be so simple, but it really is.
With IR, does it matter where you put that transmitter? Like, do you have to specifically put it in a place where that light can hit those devices?
Yes, so and it's going to vary by manufacturer, so I cannot speak for everyone. You can always send us your drawings and we'll just heat map it for you and show you, but honestly, our smallest unit is, we have 2 form factors. One is a racked unit, and you're going to route the emitters to, so that's for like large spaces. Each one of those emitters covers 40,000 square feet, so. But we have it all in one unit, so it is a transmitter and radiator in one. It is very compact, and in ideal situations, 30,000 square feet, which is that one. But the reasons why you would add on an extra emitter is the room flooded with, is it a glass room flooded with light? Is it a black box built to absorb light? Are there huge poles in the way, pillars? Am I running more than one channel, right? So our all-in-one will handle 2 channels, but at 2 channels it's 15,000 square feet because they're sharing those lights. It's also made out of that infrared permeable plastic, so that's how we get our coverage. Those specs I cannot speak for anybody else, but yes, where you install it. So in a room like this, I would probably, well, that display's too high, but normally it's just really subtly put right above the display.
Okay.
If you have an odd-shaped room, balcony, alcove, you might do it like this, or in the corners of rooms. If coverage is not the issue, but you're running lots of channels and it's shrinking, you can just run them right on top of each other in the same direction. But if it's a challenging space, you would just put them so that you can get full coverage. Okay. Because what you don't want to do is tell someone you have to sit in that corner if you want to pick up reception. That is not an equal access to anything.
Right.
It's one of those, that's why loop can be so difficult, because maybe you can afford to loop part of your room, and then tell people you must sit in that corner. It's not what you want to do. That does bring us to loop, which people in this room are probably pretty familiar with, but basically you're doing the audio source, you're running it to a driver, an induction driver, and you have to run a installed cable. So it is a construction project. It's either in the floor or the ceiling. The things you need to account for are metal in the room. Will there be instruments with pickups in the room? Is it secure? The way it works is once you have fed that wire through to the driver, anyone with a T-coil hearing aid or cochlear implant must step within the loop, sit within the loop, and then they would be able to receive that signal. And the beauty of it is it's delivered right to your hearing aid through your own personal programming. So it is the best possible scenario for those who have that type of hearing aid. For those that don't, their experience would be very similar to any other technology. They would go check out a T-coil receiver, a loop receiver, has a little T-coil in it. They would hold it, they would wear a headset, and they would step within the loop and they would hear the signal. So a little less inclusive for them, but for those that it serves, it's really great. It's old technology, but my little saying is, so is a fork, but it's still working very, very well. It's the best way to shovel food into my face, right? So hearing loops are great. They're just a heavier lift for all of us, right? You have to have the capital and you have to have the time. And once it's installed, you have to tell everyone so nobody cuts this carpet and ruins it. But it's not, technically, you can make it pretty secure in that you must have a T-coil, but I wouldn't consider it very secure. And it changes the rules a little bit. Remember, I have to have receivers and I have to have neck loops. If I am installing a hearing loop, I don't have to have neck loops anymore. I do have to have receivers though for everyone else in the normal count. Because if I don't have a T-coil, I still have to get a receiver from somewhere, right? So the only thing it changes on the ADA rules is no more neck loops. And it is a single channel. You wouldn't run this if you need more than one channel of audio. Okay, audio over Wi-Fi. This is the darling. It is growing so fast, and higher education is our #1 growing demand for sending that audio signal over Wi-Fi. Basically, you're taking the audio source and running it to, instead of a transmitter, it's going to a server. That server is going to live on your network, probably your student network, it could be your guest, it could be standalone if you want to do it that way. That's going to be different for every manufacturer. That I'm just speaking for Listen at this point. And then that's going to go out over Wi-Fi, and it can be received either on my personal smartphone device, and in that experience I would probably walk in, I would see signage, I would say, oh, yeah, I need to download an app. Ours is called Listen Everywhere, and that your signage would say also join this network, right? For you guys, your students are probably on your network every day, it'll be automatic. Then when I open the app, after I'm on the school's network, the channels that are available are going to populate in that app. If I leave here and go down to a sports bar and they have it and I want to watch their TVs, I'll see their channels when I join their network. Or the listener can check out a receiver. Because remember, even though we are all carrying around a receiver in our pocket, ADA law doesn't know that. They didn't know this would even come up. So this is where we talk about emerging technologies. They have not changed the requirement for receivers, so you would still need to provide Wi-Fi receivers. Some manufacturers have them, some don't. Back in the day, you used to be able to source phones to do it, but again, the neck loop requirement requires a 3.5 millimeter jack. That's what the law requires. It's very difficult to find that on a phone these days. And here's how we can get away with it and why ADA says it is acceptable. Nothing in these requirements prevents the use of designs, products, or technologies as alternatives to those prescribed, provided they result in substantially equivalent or greater accessibility and usability. So if the latency is too much, that's not really an equivalent situation. If you aren't able to provide receivers, that's not substantially equivalent, right? So then it wouldn't be compliance. But as long as you're checking the boxes for ADA, Wi-Fi is acceptable. The thing about Wi-Fi that is great, so really generally you see a lot of infrared and lots of interest in Wi-Fi on university campuses, is because it's a pretty inexpensive way to get a high channel count, and you can use it for more than one thing. And we all know what it's like to buy receivers and have them sit in a closet because people don't want to use them. So first of all, obviously assistive listening, but if you're providing content in more than one language, like for a performance, that's just another audio feed. Audio description is a really popular one in performance spaces. TV audio and personal listening would be like the rest of us. If you've got a rec center and you want to put the TVs up on while people run, it's anywhere where the Wi-Fi reaches on campus, you can offer that as a service if you're providing that channel. But the beauty of it is now you have one ecosystem across your campus instead of infrared receivers in the classroom and RF in the gym, for example, which is pretty common on campuses. Did you have a question?
So, okay, so as you're talking about the Wi-Fi, because I did a little test with a vendor, manufacturer a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Do these, I don't know, very specific, but can they take it like multiple channels and then broadcast out?
Yeah, so
I'm thinking like you could do like a building and then down take from every room.
yeah, so we build for high channel count, and not everybody does. So I can speak to a couple things there. Our smallest server is two channels. That's just the minimum. So, 2 mono, 1 stereo. Generally, assistive listening, mono is better, right? We don't have equal hearing in both ears, so we do mono. And we are not picky what you feed to that. It could be any channels you want. So that's the base model. And then they go 4, 8, and 16. If you want in excess of 16, with Listen, you're going to start stacking those on the
Stack
same
it on.
network. And you would stack for a couple reasons, to get to the channel count you want, or to, each server will handle 500 simultaneous streamers at a time. So if you
So that'd
think
be
1,000
500
people,
receivers,
500 people stream.
so that'd be 500 receivers.
Yes, so but that's if they're all turned on and listening
Yeah.
at the same time. There's no limit really, I mean, obviously you want
The
to.
odds of me actually getting 500 would be never.
Yeah.
But
People, like a stadium might only have 2 channels, but they might have 5 servers stacked redundantly to get to their user count. So a campus might say, we need a 2-channel in these rooms, but in the more modern buildings, we are gonna run Dante and have 16-channel servers just stacked in the IT closet, right? So both
That's-
ways work, there's
yeah.
not a right or a wrong. And having
does
said that,
okay, so, gotta get this in my head.
yeah, no, please.
So you're saying 500 channels, is that part of the, to meet the ADA requirements of channel availability? Or is that just, I can broadcast out 500
No.
channels?
It's,
I could have up to 500 different
no,
users.
not channels, you,
Devices.
channels,
500 devices, connections.
500 people saying, I'm gonna join this
Yep.
network and listen to
Sure.
this channel all at the same time. And so when you have more than that and adding on redundant servers with the same audio feed, it just helps the system spread that out more evenly, so it's not so much draw on one server.
And that's a multicast then?
Yeah, so the way ours works is it goes out in multicast, and then when it connects, it's unicast. That's how we can get to
Right.
such high numbers.
It's multicast, so it has a connection and then,
Yeah, because it's like
then
last
then it's
year.
60 unicast.
Yeah, there's a signal,
Cheaper.
do you wanna join it?
Yeah.
Right? Now,
Well, that would be that.
having said that, and I can say this because this is not for a fix of credit, so we don't have to be brand agnostic. Having said that, after this, I'm demoing the system downstairs in the cinema as it sits today. So basically with our own device, but I also have the version that will be shipping in 2 months, which has some other elements, the ways to trigger audio. Because think about, in a campus, one of the problems is, okay, so now we have 200 classrooms of audio. Do I really want to open an app and see 200 channels? No. Do professors really want anyone on the network to just be able to like, oh, I'll listen into that one? No. So what do we do about that? We are releasing a way to just trigger the right audio when you walk into the room. So you'd be able to go in and even hide most of those channels, or say these are just the channels for this building. Or in some cases, if you don't want that classroom audio leaving the room, and will have beacons that can just trigger the right audio on your personal device or the ADA device. So I'm showing that downstairs because that should be shipping probably by InfoComm. But those things were built for higher ed specifically as a request for, we don't want to password protect these channels so students don't audit every class. How do we keep it secure to the room? So, or how do we direct those high channel counts where they need to be in the building? So I am showing that downstairs right after this. This is pertinent to tax credits. You guys are really not businesses, so I'm sure you have educational grants and bonds that will help you out there. No one in this room spoke up and said they wanted a mix of credits. So that's about it, and we are probably right up on, getting close on time. The only thing I will say is you're probably hearing a lot about, have you heard a lot about Bluetooth Low Energy, Auracast, things like that? The market is kind of getting flooded with information on that, so it lends itself very well to forward-thinking, modern assistive listening.
So you do like a Bluetooth transmitter in a room?
Yeah, so we actually have one releasing later this year. We are now sister companies with Ampitronic, that are the hearing loop provider that you're probably pretty familiar with if you do loops at all. And so we co-developed an Auracast-based transmitter and receivers. So I will give you a 2-minute flyover. Bluetooth Low Energy is the next generation of Bluetooth Classic. Bluetooth Classic does exactly what it was built to do, replaces a cord in our relationship with our phone and a speaker and all of that. But it has some limitations when it comes to assistive listening. For example, latency, right? I can quote the latency that you're going to get between our Wi-Fi system and a decent phone, right? 40 to 60 milliseconds for a nice phone, more than that for a burner phone. But what I can't quote, neither can you, and no one can control, is the latency between their phone and whatever Bluetooth device they want to stream to, right? Their hearing aid, their AirPod, the codecs can be different between their phone in their device every time, and it will reintroduce more latency. For some folks, that's not a problem. But in small spaces, where you can see my lips moving, or for people who have enough residual hearing that they're hearing my voice plus a delayed feed, that might not be great, right? So I don't recommend doing things like retirement communities, where everyone's got a hearing aid, it's all gonna fire at different times. So Bluetooth has some limitations, battery draw, all of these things, plus it is a pairing. It is meant to be one-to-one. Bluetooth Low Energy is the answer to that. It's gonna have less latency, it will not be a pairing, right? It is not a two-way bond.
It just shows up and
It is true
Right.
broadcast using the next Bluetooth protocol. That's Bluetooth Low Energy. Auracast is a protocol under that umbrella. And Auracast is the technology that all manufacturers, this protocol you build from. So there are already Samsung Galaxy has Auracast, it's been released. You have to use it with their earbuds, so you still have an intermediary. It's not quite there for that full broadcast. Phonak Hearing Aids has one with Auracast, but again, you're using their app. Because some of that stuff's not finalized, right, by the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. They've got to figure out how to hand off those packets of information. We don't know what Apple's going to do. So is it a true bring your own device at the day we ship it? I don't, if Apple gets it together, sure. I don't know that we'll know that by then. So we are, and it's ADA, right, we need to have receivers. So we are releasing Auracast receivers, but, and there's still a little bit of information to be known about how to pass off when you're, if you did your entire building, how you're going to really navigate all that channel count. That will come as it progresses. So I think we're 2 to 5 years out from it being really prolific, but there will be a time where it's even on our TVs, right? I'm in my own living room and I can hear my earbuds if I'd like to. We're not there yet. This is not a fire drill. This is not an emergency. It will be a networked, pretty high-end solution. So if you're thinking for the future, your 5-year plan, that might be something you would consider incorporating. I don't see it as like the direct replacement for like what we discussed for Wi-Fi or anything like that yet. Yeah, I know that you'll be able to encrypt it, but again, password. So not, there's more to come there. By the time we launch, we'll know more about that, but we will have it work, we've been showing it, so we will have it working at InfoComm if you want to see it there. It's nice, it's discreet, it looks like this. Kind of looks like a WAP.
Oh.
And again, you can make compliance with it, but it's more the bring your own device aspect depends on so many other people besides any of us in this room, right? What are the hearing aid manufacturers and phone manufacturers gonna do? We all have to wait for that part. But the next 3-5 years, pretty exciting. Hearing aids too. People don't just turn in their hearing aids. They're $9,000. I'm not gonna be like, oh, Auracast is here? Take my old ones, I'm gonna buy new ones. Because they're gonna wait until Auracast is prolific in the
What about the
environments
Walmart hearing aids now with their over the counter?
Yeah, right,
What about
so
those?
the turnover time for that is gonna be a long time. The loop will exist and the way it exists now for a real long time yet. I don't think it's,
Okay.
Yep.
So, completely different topic. How do you, or are there any ideas on how to get administrative people to understand that it's
75,000.
75,000.
I can share that. Yeah, I'll share with that, but
No, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
They don't understand
we are,
anything other
but the
than
thing is, let's
this is
say,
a legal
we are making an effort, but it's, now I just saw that there's 50. Well, that's basically every room needs to get touched.
yeah, yep. So I would say, do good, better, best, right? So what can we do now? We can get a portable kit and we can,
Well, that's,
every system you build, just make sure there's access to the audio in that room,
right.
right? Bare minimum, that's the best. The ideal scenario is you've got a transmitter of some sort in every space. I like IR or Wi-Fi for that because it's the simplest for,
Well, that's what I was thinking about the server and throwing down to every room. And you can do a server and say, there you go, have fun. Then you,
so.
but then you don't tell, you have to
But
have.
you gotta have the other receivers and everything else.
Well, you gotta have the Wi-Fi receivers.
And your expenses in the receivers, truly, it
Yeah.
really is. Okay, so I can't afford to do 2 receivers for every single solitary classroom.
Well,
What
that's
can
the
I afford
question,
to
yeah.
do?
Where's
Then you sum total that.
yeah.
That would get you to a lower number. But, okay, so we can't do 20 per building. Can we do 5?
Mhm.
Start there. See what your use is, because like I said, it's not
Well,
like they're
yeah,
roaming
that's-
around trying, and None of this advice is true in California. California building
We
inspectors,
won't talk about
look at that.
it. Respect.
So none of this advice, if you're recording out there, this is not for California. But everywhere else, the chances of you being reported for that violation, if you have something to hand a student when they ask, pretty small. So start with that. And then make a 5-year plan for how you're going to get compliant in all the spaces. And certainly in your new spaces, as they're becoming online, it's
My university, something new now.
Can anyone, such as a disgruntled employee,
anyone.
file?
Anyone. So things like your graduations, right? If grandma comes and she can't hear and you don't have, even if you have receivers and they're dead, because no one's ever asked for them before, they could report that. They're gonna come and they'll investigate and be like, you need to plug those in, right? That's probably how they'll.
Don't put batteries in.
Usually
Leave
it's
the batteries out.
dead batteries, because
Yeah,
they've been
leave the
sitting on
batteries
a
out.
charger for 4 years and the
Yeah.
batteries are gone.
Yeah.
I have a.
So that's why I'm saying, start with the minimum that you can do and show that they get used. That's the other reason why people like Wi-Fi, is because it actually does get used, but, by everyone, not just the
So
hard of hearing folks.
do I, talk to my student disabilities office?
I would
and say,
start there.
Oh.
hey, let's play with them and let them kind of help figure out.
Yeah,
this.
every campus negotiates that differently. Is it an accessibility issue? Is it really the AV team's responsibility?
Well-
Where's that, whose budget and whose responsibility?
Well, I would wonder if I should have, not them, head it, but have them do the checkouts and stuff. So
Yeah,
that
that's
way-
what- so that's
the other
Services should do that.
That way I can get at least the usage idea.
Yeah,
You're not gonna know that,
And they
I
need
got a
to
system,
promote it.
I thought it was funny, tell one time,
Yeah,
system's been running for 20 years. One time I used it
it's
last year.
and people don't even know it exists.
I used
Right?
it, it was me.
So now
I'm
you
gonna
just,
get a
so you're my poster child for why schools are like, I need to know about Wi-Fi, because it gets used, right?
Yeah.
And it's new and cool and flashy and
PA.
all of that stuff.
Well, the actual signage requirement,
Yeah.
I know we do not comply with our signage requirement.
We don't either.
Well, then you're better off than people who throw up a sign and don't have
Yeah.
any assistive listening.
We just have all the receivers and everything sitting right next to the instructors, so they'd be sitting right
That's
next to
great.
them on the lectern, right there.
Yeah, you should have the signage, but maybe at least put it at the entrance to the building, right? And students come every day, so they know where to get it,
Yeah.
right? It's more, these laws, I mean, technically, I could argue they could be rewritten specifically for school because your needs are different. The students come every day, they don't need a sign to tell them, but again, it's written for the broadest audience, those schools.
Thank you.